and welcome back to the Automation Capitals project. Today I'm back in Old Basara. Just as I mentioned in the last episode, I'll be getting started on a kind of touristy resort-like area at one end. But of course, before getting into that, I have quite a few changes I made that were mainly to increase the population in the middle of the last episode to support Dalluha Deep Oil Link. So yes, let's get to this. First of all, the biggest visible change is in the Al Asdiar area. I've added a lot of office space to really fill in this, the region and some of the more high-rise apartment buildings for the area to add the density and fit in nicely with the offices. As I get a few scenic shots of the area. I've also enabled the realistic parking on the traffic manager, so there's certainly a lot more traffic around and a lot more parking spaces used up, but it's something that makes sense for a more realistic city, which is what I'm aiming to have. Also here is I've added a new high school as well. I've combined the European high school asset with this gym here to have a higher capacity. Got a nice field, a few buses parked up here, just what you'd expect from a fairly large urban high school with a lot of apartment towers around, and of course the office area that I've shown already. And going out this way, there's of course also a lot more residentials and parking lots with traffic kind of looping around, trying to find a space to park. It's mostly tourists taking up these spaces. Now over here, I've also expanded historic Old Basara a little bit. I've been something I realized that I've mentioned before, that I wasn't really making enough parks, so that's something I've been aware of, and so I've added places kind of like this small park here and just some spaces between buildings as well, just to have a bit of greenery, because there's no sense building a nice city on the oasis and then to just pave over all the fertile land that's around. And that's why I've also added a few farms over here, making use of this fertile land that could be part of the historical city. I mean, it's still not 100% sure about this, but it would be nice to have at least a couple of fields growing some plants or whatever that have been around for a very long time, and helping provide a bit of food to the city and a little bit of variety to the cityscape here. And I'd say that's probably about it for the changes. And so over here is where I'm planning to get started in the resort area, and I'll get started on it with a historical building in this area right here. So let's get to it then. So I figured it would make sense to turn this into a park, just to have some amount of visitors coming around and more or less exploring the grounds instead of just going into the unique building I've set up. For now, I just have it called Vacation Palace, because I figured it could be a historical kind of vacation home for the royal family or something of the sort. That obviously it's been repurposed at this point. If anybody has any suggestions for a better name than that, I'll be happy to think of something else, or maybe I'll just try to think of something before the next episode. So right now it's definitely just a placeholder here. Now for this place, it's definitely a little different than the rest of historical Old Basara over here. So there's going to be a lot of landscaping added to it, which I'm clearly working on here with the fencing and the bouquets and everything like that. And it's ultimately the sort of thing that should be one of the historical landmarks of the region, and something that people would come and visit, explore the beautiful grounds, explore the beautiful historical building, and just get a nice view of the old part of the city across the water, all that sort of stuff, and just a very grand look to appeal to the more historic kind of tourists that would be visiting this part of Basara to begin with. Now, before getting too far on the landscaping of the vacation palace, it's best to set some kind of boundary, which in this case would be the building next door. And for this, I figured that having a really nice marina would fit the area well, with the lake and everything being the only natural body of water in the region. After all, nothing says wealth like having a nice yacht at the marina in the middle of the desert, right? there we have it. The landscaping for the vacation palace is pretty well done. I'll, of course, be showcasing the area at the end of the video to get a better look at all of that. And now at this point, it's just to expand the vacation portion of Old Basara a little further to, have some room to fit in the hotels to bring in all the tourists and various resorts and stuff. This is very much a transitional area kind of thing that's just separating the more authentic part of Old Basara that actually has residents living and working there and all that to a more tourism-focused portion that is, just catered for the people coming into the city and less so for the locals. With this being in the older part of the city, of course, there's less of a divide between that because it's not the post-oil-rich Basara that'll be for the modern city, which had everything built from the ground up to be catered to tourists. So in this case, it's a little more organic in its setup with buildings that would have come up gradually over the years. And overall, I get the impression that this tourism focus would have probably mostly happened around the 1970s and 80s, maybe even as early as the 60s. And as you can see here, I'm also putting down a modern building because, of course, not everything's going to stay old and maybe a little rundown in such a wealthy city. Of course, some of the buildings would eventually be purchased and replaced by something more modern to try to lure some tourists to this part of the city that's a little less saturated with wealthy resorts and the like that I'll have planned for the downtown core region, or even just full-on modern tourism districts. So as you can see from the look of what I've put down so far, this is a tourism region that would certainly appeal to less wealthy tourists compared to what will be the glitzy, glamorous one. It's a lot of buildings that look to have been built maybe in the 70s, 80s, or whatever. And they would have been pretty luxurious for their time, but at this point they just don't compare to the modern hotels that are around, and of course much higher prices. But that said, due to its proximity to Old Basara, it would definitely have some sort of appeal for people who don't necessarily want to travel across a lot of the city just to experience the historic portion. So they could still get some tourists that are here more for the experience than the glamour. And as you can see, I'm definitely struggling a lot trying to figure out what buildings to put where, and just, overall getting the whole vibe of the city. It's certainly something you don't think about as much when dealing with growables, but when you're building a whole part of the city out of plop-down buildings, it's can definitely get pretty tedious figuring out what goes where and exactly what way. At least with growables, you can definitely get an idea of something that pops up that you just didn't think of and realize that it fits amazingly for the region. Here comes the big resort. This will be the centerpiece of this tourism district, and something that would have been certainly acclaimed at the time it was built, which from the style looks very 1970s. This will definitely have the look of a once glamorous resort hotel, and that nowadays is, it would still have its own glamour in a sense, but it won't compare to the modern ones, so it's certainly affordable and has a dated element to it, even with any amount of renovations and potentially modern amenities thrown into the place. One of these older features I figure it makes sense for a time that the city would have had much cheaper land is to build a large surface parking lot rather than something underground beneath the hotel. Now I'm building this now, but I'll eventually decide to just delete it and relocate it, because it's not exactly attractive to come into the nice resort hotel and just have a huge surface parking lot right in front there to have to drive through to get to the entrance. This is the kind of place that needs a more glamorous entryway and have the parking lot tucked off to the side somewhere. It's at this point that I realized that power facilities were getting to be a little lacking in the city, so I added a few transformers around to provide a little bit of power, just to avoid any brownouts should there be any fog or anything that reduces the solar capability. seeing as most of these mod power plants work as solar power facilities. And it was at this moment of trying to put in a grand entrance that I realized that the parking lot was really not in the ideal location, so there it goes. As you can see, this is a much better entrance for this kind of place. A nice little loop around and the parking lot just tucked off to the side. And here we are, a nicely covered parking lot that I figure the covering is probably a more modern edition. Some nice walkways going all the way around, finished out the back with the pool and patio and tennis court. A fairly grand entrance with fountains and everything at the front. Just all the stuff you'd expect from a grand hotel from the 1970s, essentially. And now it's time to change course and fill in some of the space and a little closer to the urban area. I figured that these condo buildings could be some timeshares or something like that, or maybe even some sort of hotel suite sort of place. Just, it's definitely a bit of a transitional area between, the vacation district and the more day-to-day portion of Old Basara. So it's a mix of apartments, both for tourists and residents, and a lot of smaller buildings, some small retail. It's not the sort of place that would have been designed as being glitzy back in the 70s, like as it is closer to the resort and closer to the water. So here we are for today. First, I'll apologize for how long it took me to upload since the last video. The holidays can definitely be a hectic time for everybody, me included. And let's start off with the vacation palace here. This is the closer look that I promised earlier, with all the nice landscaping that I've done around there. Nice outdoor cafe area, the plants everywhere, and there's already a lot of visitors taking the pathways around this park area. And now we move on to the marina. This one looks to be getting pretty popular as well. I'll need to add some boats in the back, actually. I need to download some good assets for that. I realized when building I didn't have anything to fill in there. So the next time you see this place, it'll look a lot more lively. And here's that one modern building just jutting out over the water. A couple more hotels around the area, just all the sort of stuff you'd expect to start off a vacation district. And, yeah, this episode's really gone on for a while, so it's definitely can't finish the whole place in one go. And of course, lastly, here's the Grand Basara Hotel, a focal point of the skyline for this region, just standing up above the old city. Its glamour is slightly faded, but I'd say we can all agree that it still has a certain charm to it, at least. It would still be the kind of place attracting a lot of tourists who, just want to visit the old city. And of course, I noticed that the spawning point for the building is a little too far, and people are just kind of disappearing in the middle of the walkway, so I just gotta fix that really quickly. Yeah, I think that would about do it for today. So as usual, make sure to leave any comments or suggestions in the comments below or in the automation forums thread for this project that's linked in the video description. And so for now, goodbye, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.